In the year 1666, a small fire broke out in a bakery on Pudding Lane in the heart of London. Nobody thought much of it at first, but the wind picked up and the flames jumped building to building because almost every building in the city was made of the same thing: timber, packed edge to edge, roof to roof. By the time it was over, 4 days later, over 13,000 homes were gone. An entire city turned to ash and smoke. That fire didn't just destroy London, it destroyed an idea that you could stack wood high, pack it close together, and trust it not to kill you. And in a strange way, we never fully got over it. Because here's a question that sounds simple, but almost nobody can actually answer. We've been building with wood for over 10,000 years. It's stronger than steel, pound for pound. It's literally growing out of the ground for free all around us. And centuries before modern engineering existed, humans had already built startlingly tall wooden structures. Temples in Japan that have survived over 1,000 years, still standing today. So why, in a world full of 100-story glass towers, did humans basically stop and never build a proper wooden skyscraper? Stick with me, because the answer isn't because wood is weak. That's the twist. The real reason is a 100-year chain of fear, politics, and one very convenient material that made a lot of people very rich. And it's still shaping the world above your head right now. Let's start with something that sounds completely insane. Gram for gram, weigh a piece of wood and a piece of steel exactly the same. Wood can actually be stronger than steel, not stronger overall. Put a steel beam and a wooden beam of the same size side by side, and steel wins. But per kilogram you're actually carrying, wood punches far above its weight class. Engineers have known this for over a century. It's part of why early airplanes used wooden frames before aluminum took over. So if wood is this efficient, this abundant, this cheap, why does every skyline on Earth look like glass, steel, and concrete? Why did the tallest wooden buildings for most of a century top out around 6 or 7 stories, while steel towers raced past 100? Because somewhere around the late 1800s, 3 things happened almost at the same time. And once they happened, wood never really stood a chance again. Thing 1, cities kept burning down again and again. Thing 2, a new material showed up that seemed to solve everything at once. Thing 3, the one nobody talks about, an entire industry quietly decided wood buildings were bad for business. Each one alone probably wouldn't have buried wooden skyscrapers for a century. Together they made it unthinkable. London wasn't unique. It just happened first, in a city big enough for the world to notice. Chicago burned in 1871. An estimated 300 people died, and roughly a third of the city's total value went up in smoke. Much of it wooden buildings packed shoulder to shoulder downtown. Boston burned in 1872, a massive stretch of the financial district, gone in a single night. Every time a city burned, the same conversation happened in city halls everywhere. Never again. Building codes tightened almost overnight. Wood got restricted exactly where it mattered most. Dense downtown cores, precisely where the tallest buildings would eventually go up. Here's the part that's genuinely unfair to wood, though. The buildings that burned weren't tall, carefully engineered structures. They were cheap, thin-walled shacks thrown up fast, closer to kindling arranged in a grid than to modern construction. But fire doesn't care about nuance, and neither did a terrified public watching their city disappear in an afternoon. So their reputation stuck hard. Wood equals fire. Fire equals death. End of conversation. That single idea, planted over 150 years ago in the smoke of 3 cities, is still shaping building codes today, in ways most people have no idea about. We'll come back to that. Right as cities were terrified of wood, a new material arrived that seemed almost too perfect for the moment. Steel. It didn't burn, or so everyone believed. It was factory-made, not grown unpredictably in a forest, so an engineer always knew exactly how strong it was. And it let architects do something wood couldn't at the time: go up without buckling under its own weight. In 1885, the home insurance building in Chicago used a steel skeleton and hit 10 stories. People called it the first true skyscraper. Within 30 years, cities were racing into the sky. The Woolworth Building, the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, 102 stories, built in just over a year. Once that race started, wood wasn't just unfashionable. It was structurally out of the running. Nobody even seriously proposed it. Here's the loop, though. The twist you're probably not expecting. Steel wasn't actually fireproof. In a serious, sustained fire, Steel loses most of its strength surprisingly fast and can buckle in minutes, folding under its own weight while still glowing red. Steel just looked safe. It felt modern, clean, industrial, like something fire couldn't touch. Perception beat physics decisively, and that gap is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this story. Now, here's where it gets a little uncomfortable. Once steel and concrete became the default, entire industries grew up around them, with every incentive to keep it that way. Steel mills, cement plants, insurance companies that priced wood buildings as dramatically riskier, sometimes double or triple the premium of a comparable steel or concrete building, regardless of how well engineered that wood actually was. And building codes, written decades earlier in the aftermath of London, Chicago, and Boston burning, simply never got meaningfully rewritten. Large parts of North America capped wood frame construction at 4 to 6 stories, flat out, not because engineers had tested taller wood buildings and proven them unsafe, but because it was just the rule. Inherited fear, written into law, never seriously revisited. For nearly 100 years, an entire building material was frozen out of tall construction, not because of new evidence against it, but because of old trauma nobody in power had incentive to re-examine. Wood didn't lose the skyscraper race on merit. It was disqualified before the race even started, by rules written in a moment of panic and never questioned again. So what changed? Why are wooden skyscrapers suddenly, genuinely, a real thing again? 2 words, cross-laminated timber. Take thin layers of wood, stack them at right angles to each other, one layer vertical, the next horizontal, and press them together under enormous pressure with structural adhesive until they fuse into one solid, dense slab. The result behaves almost nothing like the wood in your grandfather's shed. It's dense, dimensionally stable, and engineered to a tolerance that would have been unthinkable in the 1800s. And critically, when it burns, it doesn't collapse the way people instinctively assume. Here's the detail that changes the equation. Thick engineered timber chars on the outside when exposed to fire, and that charred layer acts almost like natural armor, insulating the wood underneath and slowing the burn to a crawl. In real fire tests, mass timber beams have held structural integrity for hours, comparable to, and sometimes better than, unprotected steel exposed to the same flames. The material blamed for burning down entire cities has quietly turned out to be one of the more fire-resistant tall building materials available today. It just took the rest of us and rulebooks written 150 years ago a long time to catch up to the physics. Today, an 18-story wooden tower stands on the edge of a lake in Norway, the tallest timber building on Earth when it was completed, and it won't hold that title much longer. In Milwaukee, Vancouver, and Toronto, engineers are pushing this material far past the limits the building codes of 1900 ever imagined. There's a proposal on the table in Tokyo, backed by a company willing to spend billions, for a wooden skyscraper that would eventually rise 70 stories, made largely from a material legislated out of tall buildings for over 100 years, based on fires that had nothing to do with how that material actually performs when engineered properly. So to actually answer the question we started with, why did humans never build wooden skyscrapers? It wasn't because wood couldn't handle it. It was because a handful of catastrophic fires over a century ago convinced entire industries and governments that it couldn't. And almost nobody questioned that again until very recently. Which raises a bigger question than the one we started with. If we got this wrong for 100 years quietly without anyone in power having a reason to check, what else are we still building today? Simply because that's the way it's always been done? Something worth thinking about next time you look up at a skyline and wonder how different it might have looked if one bakery fire in 1666 had never happened at all.